would have driven me. Other times I know my dad doesn't get my sister. Also has to do with what my sister does for a living. My sister currently works for a jeweler in New York, and they do a lot of things where they work with like non-conflict stuff, or they use unconventional materials to make their jewelry, and I think it's awesome. I remember one of the first times my sister came home, she was wearing this ring made from mammoth bone. And I was like, mammoth bone? That's awesome. And then I'm like, how much was it? She's like, yeah, like $10,000. I was like, what? Other times where I remember my sister showing me things like they would make rings from non-conflict diamonds. Again, my parents would always get on her case saying, you probably shouldn't take this stuff home. And my sister's like, no, don't worry about it. It's covered by insurance. And then my parents would be like, oh, how do people not just steal? It's been a long conversation. And I was always just listening because I like to eavesdrop, I guess. And I remember my sister showing me they would make diamonds. I think she showed me a couple uncut diamonds. And I could just sometimes picture my dad try to rationalize a ring made with an uncut diamond. And in my head, I just laugh. Because you can see an uncut diamond, and it is just not that pretty, right? An uncut diamond, for all intents and purposes, is a rock. It is a white stone, and it has not gone through this process of diamond cutting, so it has multiple faces and facets that make it brilliant and shimmer. It's a white rock. And it's so weird because one of my cousins made a joke about this. Those cousins are actually here now too, where, I don't need to get graphic, but their dad passed the kidney stone, and they decided that they were going to save it, and they taped it on their refrigerator. And I remember somebody saying, oh, it looks like an uncut diamond. I was like, oh, that's kind of weird. Let's not say that. So jewelry is interesting because a diamond has to go through this process of chipping away and cutting in order to make it brilliant. The same goes for the gold band that would hold it. Gold is shiny, it's shimmery. Splendid? I just had to go to Christmas. Oh no, that's not Christmas. That's Aladdin. That's a whole new world. Tangent aside, let's go. But people have to remember that when gold is dug up from the ground, if you've ever seen the process of people like going to rivers and sifting through, trying to dig for gold, when they finally find it, it's like a celebration. They hold it up. It still looks like a rock. Gold has to go through refinement in order for it to be visibly beautiful. But at the same time, they found value in this uncut diamond. It's worth people risking like life and limb times in order to find this thing that has to be refined and worked at in order for it to be visibly beautiful, like I said. The value of these things are deeply embedded in the rest of its impurities. Thus the need for refinement. And refinement is very much where we're camping out today. Because as we look through Scripture, the term refinement in relation to God being the one who does it is used in Scripture more than 12 times. And as we think about Christmas, as we're not necessarily led worship, we can't separate the initiating love of God in both the baby Jesus who was born a human and the man who willingly offered his life for us, dying on our behalf and rising from the grave in order to conquer sin. We can't separate those things. We can't think about Christmas and only pray to the baby Jesus. That just doesn't exist. In the same way, we also can't separate the fact that God initiated this love, reached out in order to save us. But he also reached out and saved us so that he could transform us. It was this reaching, it was this saving, but it was also very much this act of transforming us in order to pull out those Christ-reflective beauties that we have a hard time seeing a lot of times. The beauty of Christ, just like gold, is deeply embedded within the rest of these impurities that surround us. And God has this plan to transform us into the likeness of his Son. And this brings up a couple points. One, it leads me to this place where I want to say, you are valuable. you're more valuable than you know. And at times, I've come at odds with this fact because I've come to grips with this idea that I believe that we are valuable, and I'm learning about how valuable we are, and I argue with the fact that is this an innate value, or is it something that's bestowed upon us? It's not value on my own, but it's Christ that's within me. Even in terms of us, like people being non-Christian, because God's image, though it is broken, it is everywhere, there's still sparks of it in people that need to be restored, which is why I still believe that love is possible even when they don't know that it's sourced from God. But God is still in it because He's that abundant. It's really just a case of really recognizing the source and the epitome of the greatest love that people get lost. And then I have this argument a lot of times where I really don't believe that we're capable of offering God anything good on our own, because we just aren't going to be good enough. That's the need for salvation. We've said it lots of times where we say that the best I could offer the Lord on my own is really a filthy rag, but with the righteousness that Christ bestowed upon us, we begin to reveal something beautiful. I'm just trying to show you some of the tension here. But regardless, I want to say you are valuable because grace, though it was free, grace at the same time was not cheap. You're valuable, especially when you consider the price, when you consider the cost for your life. You are valuable because God was willing to send His Son Jesus to be born a man, to live, to be persecuted, to die on your behalf. And when we consider this, you can't say that people don't hold value. You hold value because God chose to see you as such. And that being the case, I think it would be wrong to say that people are worthless. I feel like saying people are worthless would be similar to insulting a man's wife. You just don't do it. Insulting a man's wife is insulting a man. Calling people valuable and worthless would be you calling people a fool at a certain point, calling God a fool at a certain point. You weren't cheap. You are valuable. With that in mind, I also got to encourage us, if you're not cheap, then don't live cheaply. If you were bought at this great cost, do not live cheaply. But realizing within this Christmas story, within this Easter story, what we see is rescue and ransom colliding with purification at the same time. And that's where we come today. So as we go through our text, let's just keep those things in mind. Let's go back to Malachi chapter 3. Hear the word. It says, "Behold, I send my messenger." And know that when it says my messenger, this is very much a foreshadowing, talking about John the Baptist. Okay? And he says, "And he will prepare the way before me. And the Lord whom you seek will suddenly come to His temple, and the messenger of the covenant." And notice that the messenger at the beginning of this chapter is different from the messenger being referred to here. "The messenger of the covenant in whom you delight, but behold, He is coming, says the Lord of hosts." And we'll stop right there real quick and just know that this, even in the Old Testament, this is just completely saturated with the Christmas story. The beginning of this chapter talks about a messenger, and very much this mirrors what we see in the New Testament with John the Baptist, but that really paved the way for Jesus. And Jesus is here. He is in the Old Testament. They're talking about Him coming, and you can just picture how for the people at this time, this is a long time coming, guys. Consider everything that they're going through. God's people were put into exile, were not allowed to go to the temple, and now are out of exile, and they are just waiting, longing, and hoping for the Messiah. And here Malachi is prophesizing because the Lord is saying that He's coming. He's coming, and He's going to be the holder of both Davidic and Abrahamic covenant. He's going to be the fulfiller of the law. He's going to be their Savior. You can just pictured people just saying, please come. They have this deep longing in their heart because they honestly believe that once the Messiah comes, they can say, finally, our champion is here, the one who stands on our behalf and on our side, who will hold us in his favor, will finally tip the scales. He's coming. But then something strange happens. I don't know if I should say strange. I don't know if that's be blasphemous. But either way, in verse 2, there's this fairly ominous turn. So God says, the Lord, the messenger of the covenant is coming. Jesus is coming. But who can stand when he appears? Who can stand when he appears? For he is like a refiner's fire and like fuller's soap. It's interesting because if we backtrack before Malachi chapter 3, the last verse in chapter 2 is actually God's people accusing the Lord and doubting his character. If you go back to Malachi chapter 2, verse 17, it says, you have wearied the Lord with your words, but you say, how have we wearied him? And he says by saying, everyone who does evil is good in the sight of the Lord, and he delights in them. Or by asking, where is the God of justice? So this actually starts out with God's people making accusations against God, saying you are unjust. In fact, you are so unjust. We believe that you actually delight in the evildoers, in our enemies. And God is turning it around, and he says, I'm going to come. Your champion is going to be here. But when your champion arrives, will you actually be able to bear it? So he flips it around. He says you're coming, but will you, even though you're his people, are you going to be able to bear his coming? And then the next couple of verses, what we show is that God's people are not without sin. And this is obvious to us now, but while it started out with them accusing God, what we see here is like this, it's almost like a counter lawsuit, where it's this covenant countersuit, and it shows evidence for the need for refinement. So, from verse 3, we'll read through this again. It says, he will sit as a refiner and a purifier of silver. And he will purify the sons of Levi and will refine them like gold and silver. And they'll bring offerings in righteousness to God. Then the offering of Judah and Jerusalem. Don't get lost in the terminology here, but as we look at Judah and Jerusalem, just consider it talking about and God's people will be pleasing to the Lord as in the days of old, as in former years. And then it gets pretty descriptive about a couple certain things that God's people explicitly did that evidence the need for more growth, for continual growth. And he says, then I'll draw near to you for judgment, and I'll be a swift witness against sorcerers, adulterers, those who swear falsely, those who oppress the hired worker. And so we consider the history of what's going on here. If you get kind of lost, this really just shows who we are as human beings who dare to follow God. We have this pattern of straying away from him, and this pattern of growing lax. You may be on fire for God, but somehow we all typically grow complacent. And for the people historically here, what happened was people were called to give an offering, right? And part of this call to give an offering meant that people were supposed to bring a sacrifice that was without blemish. You get what I'm saying? And somehow, if this kind of got perverted and grew into people, like people typically do, we typically hoard and hold on to the things that we feel are valuable to us and offer God things that are a little bit more on the leftover side, if you're catching my drift. So what they did was, rather than give God of the first fruits, they would kind of look and see which animals may have had physical deformities to the point that they wouldn't be good enough to trade and wouldn't be good enough to sell. And they're like, okay, I'll give this one as an offering. And you kind of wonder, has anything changed? We follow the same patterns where we are on fire for God one minute and we grow lax and we struggle to even give God some leftovers. And it's mostly because we try to hold on to things that we swore were more important in our lives. And I gotta say, as we turn this around, even in this, know that there is hope. And the hope that we offer is this. In the midst of this mess, not just the mess of the world that we live in, the mess of who we are personally as individuals, as a church, as people who dare to be called Christians, in the midst of all this mess, God is at work in the midst of it. Please know that. Don't lose sight of that, because God is at work, and a lot of times we just miss it. We just miss it, or we tend to get it wrong, because a lot of this process of God working in the midst of the mess, in the midst of our ugliness, we get it wrong because this act of refinement, this act of growth,